Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Index podcast, where we come together every couple of weeks to discuss on-chain data, chart crimes, things that move the crypto industry. With me, I have Denning, on-chain corgi at Flashbots.
Hi.
Hildoby, resident data house at Dragonfly.
Hello, everyone.
Andrew, our guest for today, headmaster at Dune.
Hello, hello.
And I am Boxer, and I am the community powerhouse at Dune. Before we get started properly, nothing we say here should be relied upon as financial, legal, or tax advice. We are acting independently of our employers in this podcast. And with that, today we're diving into Solana data, a topic of struggle for a lot of analysts. The Solana data landscape was a desert before Andrew brought life to it. That's why I think we're all very excited to have Andrew on today. Andrew, maybe if you could quickly just give us a 1-minute intro into who you are.
Yeah. Been in the space a couple years. I think I was part of the COVID cohort from last cycle. Started out doing hackathons with ETH Global. I was very lucky that the first people I interacted with in the space was Linda Shee, Austin Griffith, Trent Van Epps. I did not end up in an NFT community on accident. So learned Solidity and JavaScript, spent a couple months building some contracts, realized I kind of sucked at it and hated security, but it made doing data work a lot easier because I was like, oh, I understand exactly what's going on here. Dune is a great tool. Started putting out some dashboards, and then I think this was like January or February 2021. I wrote like a guide because I was like, everything I learned for data science in like Web 2 was from like Tor's data science on Medium. And I was like, wow, there's no one writing anything about how to do crypto data. So I put out a guide, and then a lot of people liked it. And I was like, oh, okay. Feels nice to be appreciated. I'll do more of this. And then now it's basically my full-time job is to go and find unexplored data spaces and try to put some guides and educational material out there. Basically, that's 90% of my time.
Well, I think the broader analyst community really appreciates that spend time. Otherwise, we would not be able to know what happens on Solana.
So I think in general, we wanted to interview you with the angle that it's kind of hard to make sense of Solana data. It's not really well articulated in the space. And you actually had a tweet on just this a while back saying how frustrating it is to analyze Solana data. I think that's probably a reason why. But yeah, can you just quickly speak on this and explain your frustrations?
Well, someone will have to stop me so I don't take up the whole 30 minutes talking about these pains. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a few things, right? I think one of the starting points, and I think we hear this a lot, just comparing Ethereum to any other chain, is just like Ethereum has really good dev and data tooling. Like, I think that's inarguable in terms of like let's say we had to analyze traces on Ethereum with just Etherscan. That would be pretty painful, but we have like 20 other tools to choose from to kind of dive deeper. There's already a good set of knowledge. Contracts are all verified. Well, not all, mostly verified. So it's like bearing in mind that the Ethereum data experience is already like fairly top tier. I think going into Solana, there are a couple pains. One is like the explorers are extremely, how do I say, bloated to read. Partially, this is just because of how Solana transactions are formatted. So if you think about an Ethereum transaction, like if I go swap on Uniswap, if I wanted to do multiple swaps, I have to go and use what's called like a multi-call contract, right? I have to use a separate contract that will batch these swaps separately, assuming I'm not trying to do a routed transaction. But for Solana, this like multi-call is automatically part of the transaction payload, right? So if you think about like approving and then swapping on Ethereum as two separate transactions, you could automatically bundle that in a multi-call on Solana. So that means that you have these giant transactions that have like basically 10 actions, 5 to 10 actions within them. Like an insane amount of data. And so if you go to any random transaction on like Solscan or Solana FM, which are two of the main block explorers, you could scroll for like 20 seconds before you scroll to the bottom of the page. And I think like that's just like you take that and then you take the fact that like only half of these things are maybe decoded, and we can talk about like how decoding and open source works on Solana later, but like imagine half of that is in just raw hex. And then you have the added complication that Solana does like they parallelize transactions based off of access to accounts. And I promise I'll stop ranting for a bit after this, but Solana, you have to declare the accounts you access when you do any instruction. So if I do a swap, I'm accessing the account of the liquidity pool, the account of my token balance that I'm swapping, and then maybe one or two other accounts, like depending on the complexity of the DEX. So you have a list of like 10 addresses per instruction because those are basically locked for that transaction. So you take that like list of 10 accounts and then you multiply it by like 5 to 10 instructions per transaction. And I think like that leads to this feeling of the first time anyone goes to a block explorer, you're kind of just like, I don't want to do this. This is painful. I haven't looked at the other 3 tabs yet, and I haven't even talked about the other 3 tabs. But like I think just as a start, that's already like this is not fun. And I think for any data person, if even the block explorer is not fun to navigate, like you just know that the rest of it is going to be very, very painful.
You quickly touched on about decoding, and how does that differ from EVM? I think when you look at like Etherscan, it's very nice when things are decoded. It's like a huge benefit for everyone involved.
Yep.
How does that work in Solana? Are you seeing as many would you say there's as much being decoded? What is the difference there?
In terms of like verified contracts, you don't nicely have the code in the Explorer. I think SoulScan is working on this. So you maybe have like a couple of them that have the contracts verified. But the key thing to remember here is like, if you're familiar with ABIs in Ethereum world, which is just a summary of the functions and events on a contract, on Solana, it's called an IDL, which I'm forgetting the name of, but it's instruction DL something. One of the reasons, like, yes, you can have. There actually are a lot of programs that upload their IDL on chain, which is a nicety to have your IDL on chain because ABIs technically are not on chain. But one of the difficulties here is all programs on Solana are upgradable by default. Like every single program you deploy, and these teams will upgrade their programs like 2 or 3 times a month, if not more. So any decoding you do have, like you've probably even seen this on some Ethereum explorers. Like sometimes, like Polygon Scan, for example, is decoding with like the wrong ABI, and so I think you run into that semi often on Solana, where it's like, oh, it might be decoded, but like it's only half decoded, or if the version's slightly off, then it just says unknown transaction. So it's kind of these frustrations of like, sure, like Jupyter, Tensor, Orca, like all the big programs, you can see the decoded data in an interface, but like because of all of these upgrades and inconsistencies and having to track down the code bases over time, like it's just really, really painful to try to get it working versus Ethereum, where it's like, Compound is deployed once. They maybe do an upgrade through a governance proposal once every like 3 months, maybe, if that. So it's just very different beasts you're playing with there.
Is there any difference, like why they are loading so frequently, so different from how I feel like on EVM, if there is a project that's established, it won't change after, like for years until they have V2, V3.
Yeah, good question. I think there's 2 reasons for it. One is just like Solana does not have an EIP process. If some team wants to implement a new standard, for example, Metaplex, which is the biggest NFT team on Solana, basically all minted NFTs go through their program, and we should talk about standards, but essentially they have the main NFT factory contract. They've probably come out with like 2 or 3 other NFT standards in the last month. Like not month, like 3 to 4 months or so, some of which I haven't even included in here because I haven't gotten to it. And they just create the standard and they go and deploy it and they go make their other contracts or programs backwards compatible. And then that means if Metaplex did that, then now TensorSwap and Magic Eden also need to update their logic so that they support this new kind of token account structure for this new, like there's a new standard they put out called Metaplex Core, which they're asking me to add in here, and I have not I have not gotten to it yet. But essentially they will deploy a new standard, and then all these other teams downstream have to update their programs to account for this standard. And so you can kind of see how there's just this like constant like downstream dependency of upgrades. We're used to on Ethereum that standards go through like an EIP process, they become an ERC. Like for example, like ERC 4626, like vaults on Ethereum took maybe like a year and a half before it was like finalized. Versus on Solana, a lot of these standards are pushed basically by like the Solana Foundation plus another team. And it's just those two that kind of work together, get into the ecosystem. And they'll put out like a single factory contract that then everyone will use for whatever, creating NFTs, creating liquidity staking tokens, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So because of this, you have standards being updated and pushed by teams, like individual teams, much more than you do like across the whole ecosystem. All right. So Metaplex, they had their token metadata standard, which was like the oldest. They released compressed NFTs kind of with Helios last year. And then they just pushed out Metaplex Core, a new standard, like maybe a month or two ago. So like each time they do one of these, they are essentially updating or uploading a new program, and then TensorSwap, Magic Eden, everyone downstream now has to also support these token types in their trading. So then you end up with kind of upgrades all the time as these programs are adding different features, different instructions, different interfaces. Again, there's pros and cons. Like the pro is like Solana is undebatably moving faster than Ethereum in some of its development. But the cons is everyone else's life, especially the data analyst, sucks.
Well, Ethereum has a fairly robust standardization process with EIPs and stuff, and you mentioned it takes a while for everyone to adopt, and they're usually built into the core protocol, or at least try to be standardized in that sense. Solana, I guess, has more of Analyst as an afterthought, or at least not the priority. The goal is more to move fast and iterate quickly, rather than focus on it being analyzable easily, I guess. Yeah.
A lot of this also comes down to like the VM design, like by just like the high level design concepts. They're running a parallel or like a VM that can execute parallel transactions, and therefore they have like a very different account and address system, where in Ethereum kind of like one token is one address. In Solana, if I own USDC on Solana, that is stored in an additional account, and that account has its own address, and you need to pay kind of rent to, like that's not really enforced at the moment, but like that's beside the point. And it's like all of these like different decisions. And then I think, Andrew, if you could touch on like the like one address unequals one account, I think that's like very important for people to fundamentally grasp if you start looking into Solana data. But then there's also programs which are like you've kind of touched upon, like everyone using NFT Plex. So like how's this thing called?
Metaplex's,
Metaplex's NFT program. And if you like, this is just not a thing in Ethereum where like one piece of software is deployed somewhere, or like one piece of code, and then a lot of other people can use it. So if you could maybe quickly give us an introduction to that concept, that would be cool.
I mean, on tokens and like accounts, I think the easiest way for me to usually think about it, something that helped getting into it was like unsigned transaction on Bitcoin. Like if I'm sending Bitcoin around, technically the Bitcoin is being held in a separate address that my address, well, not separate address, but in a separate ID that my address then holds. Solana kind of takes that to the extreme where it's like, hey, for every token, like let's say I have USDC and I want to deposit that USDC in like Solend or Camino or something. I'm going to create a new token account that basically says I own the tokens, but Camino's program has ownership over movement of those tokens. Right. So on Ethereum, that would be a balance mapping, technically, on the USDC contract, and then there's some like transfer from whatever approvals on the contract side. Basically, Solana just abstracts that all out and says, hey, instead of you doing like a mapping here and then some roles and permissioning here, we're going to put all of that into one kind of account so that it's easier for you to manage different kinds of permissions on an account, whether you're a user or a program. So I think like this is one of those things as an analyst, it takes some time wrapping your head around, but I think it's actually a very smart design decision, because it leads to a lot of like very standard like token interactions. And like we'll get into this at some point, maybe today, maybe not today, with token extensions. But I think one of the reasons that, like, for example, Solana can do Uniswap v4 style hooks, but at the token level, versus like in Ethereum, let's say Uniswap v4 hooks are adopted, like you can't just apply that easily to every token and then to every contract using that token. That's going to be a whole mess that we have to deal with, and actually is pretty big vendor lock-in for Uniswap as well. Versus on Solana, because those kinds of extensions and permissions are handled on this token account level, there's a lot of efficiencies there.
For like EVM data analysts, comparing like there's internal EVM state addresses where like your USDC balance is stored somewhere in the contract storage. And like in Solana, it's actually like a way more explicit concept where like, hey, like you hold USDC, it's just stored in this account. Like to like bring that whole concept into like a transaction level, it's like if you like commit any transaction in Solana, because like nothing is like in Ethereum, we get around this problem because everything is executed sequentially. So like there can't ever be like two people who trade at the same time in some Uniswap pool. So like in Solana, like by difference, it is if I trade with a Uniswap pool, or like there's no Uniswap pool in Solana, of course, but like if I trade with a liquidity pool, I need to lock it up for a second, because otherwise there's like I'm trading against it and Dobby's trading against it at the same time. So like by including an account access list, I think it's called, at the beginning of the transaction, you basically like you can lock up like a bunch of accounts that you're gonna interact with. But by having this like concept of like accounts that I'm gonna like include inside of this transaction, Solana can do things in parallel where like the EVM is just like, oh, like one transaction, two transactions, three, like it's just
Exactly.
it needs to do it all sequentially. So yeah, very interesting concept. I think there's also like some problems with this where people are just spamming. Like you can just lock up accounts for free essentially, or like not for free, but like for some like minuscule amounts of money, and like potentially create big arbitrages and stuff. So like every design has its trade-offs. To kind of like establish like a basic understanding of the VM, we probably didn't do the best job with this, but I think that's like a good kind of groundwork to lay here.
Yes, yeah, and they're working on like other key concept here is gas on Solana does not work the same way it does on gas on Ethereum, in terms of like on gas and Ethereum, your gas used, like basically how much computation your transaction used is multiplied by your gas price, versus on Solana, no matter how much compute your transaction used, you're paying a flat fee. Whether that's the base fee or a priority fee, that's exactly the same. So that's like a very big difference that allows you to do the kind of spam that you're talking about, because like there's no scaling of compute, which is actually a really interesting design decision.
I thought they changed the flat fee to something like per state access, like per account access, and you have some sort of gas auction now.
So they've always had priority fees. You're essentially paying a priority just to access a certain state or a certain account, is a way to think about it. But it does not scale. It only scales with the demand of that specific account. It does not scale with the complexity of the transaction. So you could have a very complex MEV transaction but it's going to be priced basically just off of how in demand is that account versus versus the extra variable of like gas used.
Got it.
So that's a pretty big difference, and Solana's kind of working through ways of making that work. Because that not working well led to the failed transactions and spam that we saw earlier this year. That they solved with their 1.18 update that had no notes about it.
Wait, so they release it, and what do you mean there's no notes?
Oh, so, I mean, Solana likes to they'll release it, have the validators adopt it. The repo is kind of like a very simple PR, like normal PR message. There's no like, here's a full description of specs of everything that's changed. The knowledge is somewhere in their like very busy Discord. Helios did a good summary of 1.18 in their own kind of like developer blog, separate from the Solana.
Are docs generally lacking on Solana, whether it's like Solana itself or protocols on it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would say docs in general are lacking. Like the documentation I see on Solana is very much like, this is the bare minimum you need to do and to like run this piece of code and run this CLI to like get like a Jupyter price or something. But like if you try to find documentation on like how Jupyter perps works or like how some of the deeper token 2022 extensions work, like you have to go and read the code yourself to really understand it. The documentation is literally just like, here's the one line that you need to copy to get your program to work. Which is like still good documentation, but it's like if you're trying to be an analyst, it is very much like as an analyst, that one line of code doesn't really mean anything to me. I'm like, I don't care about the CLI. Different audiences.
It's funny. Every once in a few weeks, I want to go back to I want to go into Solana data, and then I message Andrew and say, hey, like, do you know about this, and this? And there's like 15 like exceptions to the rule, and it's just it seems very frustrating to me to analyze. And like you said as well earlier with your Metaplex, how the constant change of data means you, in terms of maintenance, is also much higher maintenance in terms of workload.
Yes, a shit ton of maintenance.
Yeah. Do you foresee any potential like fixes or like standardization happening on in the future on Solana, especially as it grows in size and in usage?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is just like missing developer tooling. Like, for example, like all of the IDLs are on chain. Someone just kind of needs to create like compiler processes to like verify your compiler, verify this IDL, and then like have that in a nice like IDL compiler block slot kind of like output, you know, and like that would help us a lot. And technically, probably the falls on us at Dune to maybe build some of that. They're working on a bunch of these kinds of like developer and interface improvements on Solana. Like something we didn't really get into, but like interfaces are much harder to build in Solana because you have to prep all of these account access lists in ahead of time. So like if you try to call Uniswap in Solidity, it's a very simple, just like pull like Uniswap router interface, whatever function, 2 lines, that's all you need. But on Solana, you basically have to go find their SDK and their example repo and like the 15 functions they used. Like, here's how you get all accounts. So I think there's a bunch of tooling there that's just missing. And like, I think as Solana continues to build momentum, we will see the kinds of people who build that tooling appear more, I think is what people are hoping for.
Yeah, I think I would be much more interested in diving more into Solana once there's a more iterative process that can be easily followed, which makes sense as well. Ethereum is in a state where it's so big, there's so much money on it as well, and like there's a lot going on already, so you can't just like try random stuff like that are instrumental to everyone. Solana, I guess, is in a growing phase it's already like huge. I'm not saying it's not, but like it's much more able to iterate quickly and do those changes on the fly.
Yeah. I think it has this luxury for maybe another year. And then it needs to get its shit together.
Well, wait, Andrew, the way you describe like accessing all the functions lists, and like you need to basically understand the entire SDK. That kind of sounds like composability in Solana would be way harder, where like I can't just easily build on top of some lending protocol or something, because like I always need to construct these like super, like not super complicated, but like rather complicated transactions with they which basically are like not deterministic before I start them, but like I need to like have so much knowledge of what's going to happen inside of the transaction before even kind of starting that transaction.
Yes. Yeah, I would say like, yeah, you need the SDK for a couple things. One is just to stay up to date on different functions and the access lists. But two is like a lot of these, like because everything on Solana is stored in accounts, like we only talk about token accounts in terms of like you have your USD token and then you have your USD token accounts, and an address can have multiple USD token accounts. But like everything on Solana follows this like main program and then sub account structure, like my stake accounts, my multi-sig accounts, my governance accounts, my liquidity pools. So a lot of the times, if you look at the instructions, like a lot of the complicated part will be like, what order do I create what accounts in, and then initialize them to what owners and what permissions? Because every every token account has like your freeze permission, your delegate permission, your approval permission. With token extensions, there's even more kind of different permissions. So it's like, if you look at the process of creating like a position on Jupiter perps or like Drift perps, like it's an insanely complex account structure. You need an SDK for it. It's pretty painful. I have not successfully written a single Solana script. So, and I'm not bad at TypeScript. It's painful. It's hard.
Yeah, and I think we haven't mentioned yet. Solana is like written in a fork of Rust, basically. So like all the programs.
Yes. Oh yeah, we somehow got this far without talking about it. Yeah, Solana is written in Rust. It all uses a Borscht serialization, which okay, we'll talk about 3 more data panes. But yeah, it's all in Rust, which means everything is compactly serialized. So like on Ethereum, for an array, let's say I have an event that's like address array. It'll give me in the bytecode like address like 32 bytes, and then for the array it'll give me 32 bytes as like an indicator of where the array starts. On Solana, the array would just be packed in there directly. And so if I have an array and another array after it, I have to figure out the length of the first array to figure out the length of like where the second array starts. And anyone who dives deep into Solana is going to realize Rust supports like option enums, which means, hey, this variable can exist or it cannot exist. And if it doesn't exist, the length is 0. So some of my custom decoding has like a bunch of case ones because the length of where a variable start changes. So that's a pretty big data pain. And the other one I forgot to mention at the start, and maybe we edit it back in at the start, is like one of the base things people in Ethereum rely on for balances is like every time I transfer ETH, there is a trace call that ETH was transferred. On Solana, you can transfer SOL without emitting any transfer function. So you can't just like a lot of these like TensorSwap, for example, or Stake program, or now Token 2022, they do this kind of back end, like you can just change the balance of an account without calling a transfer function. So then that means like if you just sum transfers, it's wrong. You got to go to a balances table. Anyways, James, I forgot what we were talking about. I'm just having like PTSD right now.
I have another pain point actually to add on to this, which I think you've probably run into. It compute and how like in general analyzing Solana, because of all these consideration and how there's so many things to consider, is just much more intense. And I don't know, can you speak on that? I think you created a lot of your dashboards. What many people don't know is dashboards on Dune. Most of the time, the better dashboards, it's not just about the dashboard, but the data underneath and the tables that are created on Spellbook. Can you talk about like creating on Spellbook for Solana versus for EVM chains?
Yeah, I can say that I have personally racked up quite the bill of compute to create those tables. I try not to ask sometimes I ask our engineers, I'm like, hey, how many how many credits have I spent on these Solana queries? But yeah, I would say for Solana, you have to create a lot, like many more intermediate views. So for people who aren't so familiar with ETL, like when you create a view, whether it's materialized or not, it's kind of like if I want to take all balances, I might take a sub filter of just token accounts first, and then in a separate query downstream take the balances of that filtered account list. So if anyone really dove into my queries, they would see like this 7 or 8 view string long of like different materialized views and spellbook tables to get this stuff to run. We've moved Solana into its own DBT cluster because I think on the main cluster it was 70% of all compute, and it was slowing down the rest of our Ethereum pipeline, and we were like, okay, we just spent literally 2 weeks moving that out, running that separately. It's very expensive, it's very slow. It's 1,000 or 10,000 times more data than all of these L2s combined. I think again, yeah, that's definitely part of the reason why I think a lot of people don't analyze it, because when you're debugging now it takes 10 minutes to run your query and see if there's an error versus 30 seconds. So that doesn't help.
Yeah, in general, Spellbook was, I guess, built with more EVM chains in mind that are just lower TPS and just less intense to run. And I was wondering why some of my PRs weren't getting merged in the past month. And I asked Jeff, and he was like, "Oh, we're working on Solana data, and Andrew keeps pushing out these humongous tables that we're struggling to have run properly." And I guess it was a good stress test for Dune, because now they are their own separate environments, and that makes it maybe a lot more manageable for you guys. Solana, DEXs, NFTs all have their own separate structure, which is super nice. And I mean, I don't know if it's I don't think it's a crazy guess, but we're going to see more and more of high throughput chains, and more of those kind of heavy in terms of compute ones. So it's a good problem to fix now.
Yeah. We're not scared of all of the different L2s or pre-confs or whatever monad mega ETH chains, because we're they're not going to be as messy as Solana. We'll be ready for when those launch. Yeah, we've already hit all the limits we could hit across AWS, DBT, Databricks. We've hit issues they've never expected us to hit.
Nice. Now, I think it'd be cool to look into some actual Solana data of ecosystem level. I think we can start with the most obvious one, which is DEX, usually the biggest sector, Solana especially. Here's your dashboard. Do you want to run us through it?
I mean, high level, we can see that the Solana story, this is the first thing I usually point out to people, is just the amount of activity on Solana this cycle beats out its last cycle peaks by 10 to 20x, if not more. Even peak Solana bull, FTX bull market, they were seeing maybe 500 million of volume a week. And now easily we've seen $10 billion of volume a week for the last I don't know, 6 months. 5 months or so.
So which is higher than the Ethereum volume now? End of last year, Solana people were tweeting about, the volume is over Ethereum.
Well, there was a couple days where I think it was over mainnet. Yeah. So Ethereum, what's Ethereum at here?
Ethereum is 11 and Solana 11. It's on par.
Yeah, it's basically tied. Obviously with all the L2s, the Ethereum ecosystem overall is still more than Solana. But volume-wise, they're about the same. Traders-wise, they're also about the same. I think I saw Uniswap put out some tweet that was across all L2s, Uniswap is seeing 4 million active traders. And classic chart thing, the reason why everything is dipping is because it's a Monday. So the charts always dip on Monday. But yeah, Solana's at 3 million active active traders. You could segment this by volume traded as well. like even if you filter out the ones who are trading less than like 100, there's still like a good chunk of people trading like 1,000 or more a week. We'll have to see how sticky these users are, but I think on a volume and traders level, like Ethereum and Solana are basically on par. One of the bigger differences is that Solana has many, many more meme coins or coins in general than Ethereum. There's like a tokens deployed chart above this active wallet. Oh yeah, new trading tokens.
Solana is quite
like we can
prominent.
see like this is like number of tokens trading for the first time on a given blockchain on a given week. And through like all of the last cycle, Binance Smart Chain was leading by like, I don't know, what is like 2,000, 5,000 tokens a week in the last like couple months, like since September, basically of 2023, Solana started taking off, and like Solana's now seeing like 100,000 new tokens trading each week. Obviously, a lot of those die out, but like Base is second to that at like 17K in terms of number of new tokens trading. So it's a pretty big momentum shift here where it's like, all of the meme coin traders and pumping and dumping has probably moved to the Solana side more so than the Ethereum side.
Seems to be a lot with Pump.fund as well.
I wanted to comment the same thing. When you break down into within Solana, it seems like all from Pump.fund. But what I noticed earlier was like when you look at the volume across Solana, like Pump.fund is like very small. It's like so small.
They have a thing where they migrate to Radium, I think, after reaching a certain market cap or threshold.
Yep.
I think that's why.
Yeah, it's like 70K market cap, which is like 30K. Like if you buy 30K worth of tokens, then it gets graduated to Radium basically immediately. So it's like a very, very low amount of liquidity. But they take 1% fees. So which is like
It's
very
interesting.
high.
What drives that migration? Why wouldn't Pump.fund like want to keep it a hold of those
I think partially it's just like building an order book is not super simple to do, and it's kind of painful to manage on Solana. And we can get into order book systems if we want, but I mean, that's a big difference between Solana and Ethereum as well. Is this is Ethereum, everything is AMMs. Solana, only Orca is an AMM. Everything else is a limit order book. But I think it's purely like from a product shipping perspective that Pump.fund wanted to just get out there to market with just like, hey, launch a token on a bonding curve. I would not be surprised if they came out with their own kind of DEX, or I guess it wouldn't be like their own kind of order book system soon. I don't think I'd find that surprising. Or maybe they have some sort of deal with Radium. Would also not be surprising.
It actually, like, whether this was by design or accident, kind of a genius system, because like the tokens graduate out of Pump.fund, so like they make space for new tokens, and like the tokens only ever like there's tokens that die on Pump.fund as well, where it's like they don't even make it out. But like if a token has gotten big enough, then it doesn't really die on Pump.fund, but rather dies on Radium. So like I think that like circle of life and death that like constantly happens on Pump.fun is kind of a good design choice, and like whether it was intentional or not. And like I think it's also like I think they did this because like Radium, like when Pump.fun launched, it's like a joke project, right? So like not a joke project, but like they needed to kind of build their credibility, and for a meme coin to kind of graduate to like the proper AMM or central limit order book exchange on Solana, I think that like allowed a few meme coins probably to like grow much bigger than if there was only ever a liquidity pool on Pump.fun. So I think like those like seems like a good design actually. Like it's pretty ingenious. I think some people are experimenting with this on Base, but so far no experiment has worked, or at least I haven't seen them yet.
I think also a good proxy in general for usage of DEX marketplaces of like organic usage tends to be MEV. So I don't have MEV data on hand. I'm working on it. You just approved
Yeah,
one of my PRs. Thank you.
I've shared the PR with many teams.
Oh
Like,
well,
it's
thank you,
coming
thank
soon,
you.
within a week. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It was. I'm trying to work with Solana data. You know, I'm working myself towards it. But actually, Dan from Blockworks shared a chart a while back showing that basically Solana had overtaken Ethereum in generated MEV.
I will say I'm not an MEV expert. It's one of the fields that I usually stray away from because it gets really deep into builders and validators and a bunch of other technical stuff. But essentially, you have Jito, which acts as the one builder on Solana. So you can think of this MEV as MEV captured by searchers. So that's a very big difference than how MEV works on Ethereum, which is mostly builders. So Jito is the only builder per se. And they feed the built blocks to validators running the Jito Labs version of MEV boot. Basically, Jito version of like a MEV sidecar. Searchers will submit their like batches to Jito, and they'll tip the Jito. Jito has a bunch of tip addresses, and they'll basically tip one of those addresses to get their searched like bundle into a built block. So what we're seeing here is tips. I believe Jito takes 5% cut of those tips. So that means Jito actually makes a fair share of this MEV revenue. Like, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think, like, Flashbots, I don't think they don't take a percentage cut, but yeah, Jito takes a 5% cut. So they are I think they might be the most profitable protocol on Solana right now.
Yeah, I think their revenue was higher than Solana, like base fees.
Yeah, their overall, like, the overall MEV revenue is higher than Solana fees. The revenue that Jito takes is not higher than Solana fee. But yeah, like, I think they generate, like, Jito generates more revenue than like Jupiter, Metaplex, or any of these other protocols on Solana. So it's pretty interesting. I think there's lots of ways to dice and slice this. We could get into like how liquidity staking works as well, because I think that like Jito creating their own like Jito Soul like LST as well was a smart kind of business decision to get more Jito adoption. Yeah, it's quite staking a MEV is quite complex on Solana, and I'm excited to have Hildeby help help me out in diving into that stuff. So it'll be interesting.
I don't know if I'm excited or scared,
Just tip
but
of the iceberg.
we'll see.
So yeah, to add some comments, like I think the chart you show of MEV tips to validator is basically like MEV revenue to validators, and the Ethereum one is pretty much all the revenue validators gets from running the MEV boost software when they run the validator, and it's like all the basically searchers profits paid out to builder, and after the builder layer, how much are paid out to validators. Supposedly builder are competing to give as much as they can to win the block while potentially make some profits. But I think most of the time builders are not really making profits. A lot of the small builder are subsidizing actually. So for Ethereum, it could be like actually searcher profits that's given out plus some maybe even builder subsidy. And like in terms of the MEV breakdown of all these revenue, for Ethereum, I think a large chunk could be centralized exchange to decentralized exchange arbitrage, mostly from like the top few high frequency trader builder, so Beaver and Rsync. And there's a huge chunk of revenue are from the Telegram bots Bananagon, who has an exclusive deal with Titan, and their user are paying like shit ton of gas priority fee and also like builder tip and for potentially sniping the newly minted tokens. And I think that is probably even more on Solana compared to Ethereum. And I think overall, Solana probably also just have a more like atomic MEV with all these meme coins. Yeah.
We'll see very soon with Hildeby's sandwich data. We'll be able to attribute that to different like bot sources. We'll be able to attribute like how many of the sandwiches are like Jito provided, and how many could be using a separate private mempool. So like Solana MEV it's probably actually higher than what we see here.
To add on what you said, right? Jito used to run a mempool for Solana where searchers are actually adding sandwiching. And like when the volume picked up in March, Solana Foundation was like, all we care the most is about user experience. We don't want user to get so much sandwich. And so they kind of basically, I feel like, it's like social layer pressured Jito to shut down the mempool. But then afterwards, there's being, I guess, like separate mempool has been spin up by some searchers, I guess. I know this one called a Deeds node is one of the private mempool spin up by like one of the searcher. So I think that's what you're saying, that like there could be some side revenue that's like coming from those mempool, but we're not counting.
Yes. Yeah. And there's generally, I think, this gets into LSTs, and we can maybe move on to that next. But like staking and validators on Solana, like you can easily redelegate your stake to another validator. So a lot of these LST systems like Jito and Marinade actually have a scoring system. So based on your score, that will determine the weight of LST share that you get delegated to you. And I think we'll very soon see, like, if you are running a private mempool, that could hurt your score, which hurts the amount of LST delegated to you. So like that social consensus layer that Danning was talking about, like that can actually be very quickly implemented on chain through a scoring system. And that's something like on Ethereum, it's like we're still pretty far away from, like, I think Rated is trying to do some similar sort of scoring. But like having delegated proof of stake natively built in means I think you can do this kind of social layer pressure on stuff like private mempools like much faster than you can on like any other chain. So that's actually probably one of the most interesting things to watch in the Solana ecosystem right now.
Is staking through LSTs, do you know if it's more prominent in terms of market share relative to Ethereum, or?
Yeah, so on Ethereum, staked, I think from Hildeby's dashboard, like 30. What percent of Ethereum is staked of total supply?
27.
27. What
and
percent
then
of staked is LST?
33%, and then there's also 8.5 through restaking. That is currently,
yeah. Okay. So yeah, what's interesting is on Solana right now, I think it's only like 7% of stake is liquid. Most of the stake is not liquid yet. That's something that everyone is kind of waiting on to pick up more. I think there's a chart on it farther down. Oh, it looks like we've moved up. What are we at now? Oh no, still 5%. So yeah, I think 5%. Something interesting here is like on Solana, I think we can assume that staked SOL is going to be more prevalent than SOL just because of the inflation rate of SOL. It doesn't make sense to ever just kind of hold SOL by itself. So assuming like most SOL is staked, we should see this LST percentage move up because that's how you're going to be able to like transact in DeFi on different platforms and whatnot. But yeah, it still has quite some way to go in terms of adoption. I think we're really only seeing the beginning of like LSTs and like MEV and how all these things can tie together on Solana. We're early.
Yeah. Wait, what's the percentage in total that is staked? That's, do you know?
I actually don't know because, as you would expect, getting total supply is actually not easy.
That's a problem on every chain. I think Ethereum is the same.
Yeah, on every single chain, getting total supply is a pain. But I believe that, so 21Co says total supply is 578 million SOL, and 400 million SOL is staked. So someone can do the math faster than I can, but that's like what, 70% of total SOL is staked compared to, what did we say for Ethereum? 27. Yeah, okay. But for Solana, there's no reason why it shouldn't go up to like 90% of SOL is staked. Especially because it's super easy to create LSTs on Solana. It's literally like an ERC20 factory contract to create an LST, which is much easier than deploying like a Lido or a Rocket Pool or something.
Yeah, it's enshrined into the protocol. essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I would expect that total soul staked goes to 80-90%, and LST should make up a giant portion of that. Which again affects validator scoring, which affects adoption of things like private mempools, and potentially different inclusion lists. Like you don't have to enshrine an inclusion list; you could just have that as part of a validator scoring system. Lots of impacts there.
Okay, very interesting. I have another sector to dive into, which is Solana NFTs. I'm amazed at how you managed to cover all the big topics in Solana. Like it's very impressive. Just in general, doing it on like any chain is impressive. Doing it on Solana of any chain is very impressive. So very, very well done. Congrats on this.
Thank you. I pulled my hair out.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, we currently have about $80 million worth of NFT marketplace volume per week on Solana.
Yep, I think Ethereum is actually about the same. Kind of fallen on all chains, so like just like 10 million.
Solana is above actually. Well, as of like last week, but otherwise it's just...
I think there's rumors that Mad Lads is doing some sort of airdrop. So someone came and swept a bunch of NFTs, literally like last night. Good for my bags.
and by the way, I wanted to point out, I accidentally broke your graph by adding blast because I think it was a bar chart at first.
Yeah, I literally just edited that. If you refresh the page.
Oh, damn, you're quick.
It's the classic. I created it as a bar chart, and then changed it to lines. Blast actually has a good amount of NFT volume. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's gone down as Blast TG came around, and I guess people stopped farming a bunch, and Blur volume overall went down on Blast, but it kind of stuck around actually on Ethereum. So it's like fairly constant on Ethereum, but I don't know, it's another topic. I'm generally curious about the state of the ecosystem in terms of NFTs. I think honestly, I'm not super familiar. The ones I know are like Mad Lads, probably are one of the rare ones I know on Solana, and I haven't heard of NFTs as prominently as I have for like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, and Pudgy Penguins. Is it would you say it's a thriving ecosystem, or is it?
NFTs still play a part in it. I think that the people who are building NFTs, whether that's compressed NFTs or whatever, are trying to do it much more at a consumer level versus like a trading level. Like, for example, Boba Guys uses Solana NFTs for their rewards program. And like that's kind of more of what the Solana Foundation and other teams have been pushing for versus launching collections. I think that's purely like a cultural difference of like you just don't have the people who want to launch collections building on Solana right now.
Also no audience, no? Like everyone is caught up in new tokens. Like I think like in general, like nobody cares about NFTs anymore. They were like they're so 2021. I genuinely think the market for like 10k PFPs or any like similar projects which were like all the hype in 2021, like I think that's just like I don't think it will ever revive. So it's like I think like we'll soon need to kind of differentiate in NFTs where it's actually like is there trading volume for like I don't know NFTs that have like real world assets attached to them, or like are they I don't know like real world like collectibles or something like this.
The last like bull run was mostly about like NFTs being treated as meme coins, and people eventually realized if we want to do meme coins, it might as well be liquid because it's just much more efficient in every single way. I'm excited about NFTs for like with the other like potential use cases, RWAs and like anything else that just is like different rather than just putting a JPEG attached to an NFT. I think eventually it'll take off, and there'll definitely be stuff like this, but I'm still like waiting out for like what that looks like. They haven't come back in a big way as of yet, but maybe one day they will. Let's stay hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing I can really call out for NFTs on Solana besides it's cheaper to mint them, but yeah, I haven't seen any special use case or something that's like super interesting to me there.
Yeah, you should see all the Polkadot parachains who are really cheap at minting NFTs and the success they're having. It's amazing. It's like, I
no.
don't think that's like a particularly compelling argument anymore, since like guess like we have way too much block space to sell nowadays, and like
That's fair.
like the infrastructure costs don't like at some margin like they will start to matter, but like in general it's like
yeah, when they find a use case again, it'll matter, but not now.
yeah, exactly.
What do you guys think about like Pudgy Penguins launching their own chain? I think Bored Apes are also working on one. It's called Abstract, and they recently launched it. Well, I mean, they recently announced the launch and also acquired Frame. So essentially, now they're like, oh, we have the social layer. Frame is going to help with the infrastructure layer, and together we can fill the pieces. Because the thesis is that current chains are very focused on infrastructure rather than actual social and all the rest, which I think is a very valid argument. But I don't know. I'm kind of curious. NFT focused chain, like what would that look like? We have like Zora. Zora is probably the best example of one that actually works fairly well. And, you know, they found their own niche, and they're like, if in terms of editions, Zora is kind of synonymous with it, and they have their own chain, and it's very working very well. But, you know, maybe there's more in terms of, if you look at NFTs, Pudgy Penguins, Bored Apes are both like top in terms of mindshare, I guess, and market cap. So of all people, maybe they are the one who would succeed if there's an angle there.
I think like the chain is called abstracted, right? So like what I'm hoping they will do is just implement account abstraction in like a reasonable manner. And since they have the distribution, and Pudgy Penguins is also the guys who've like sold like plushies in Walmart and stuff, right? Like that's okay. That's very their team offsites must be interesting. It's like on the one hand you'll have like giga brain like engineers, and on the other hand like people who design plushies for Walmart. They've proven they can like use their distribution channels very well. So like if they're the ones who actually bring like maybe not like I wouldn't call it so much as an NFT chain, but rather like I think they're even trying to like integrate more with other chains and just be like this like chain of chains. Kind of like Near is making this pitch at the moment as well. If that's what they're going for, and like they have the distribution, it's crazy where you just can randomly find on the internet like Pudgy Penguins. It is like it's genuinely like kind of sifted into popular culture. And like it's the only NFT project that has survived, or like survived and thrived and like actually broke out of the chains of the kind of crypto Twitter ecosystem. So in that regard, like I wouldn't say bullish, but like I'm very excited to see what they'll do with this.
I'm excited for anything that's like people trying out new stuff. If it's just yet another chain that's yet like the rest, it's not going to be interesting. But I'm hoping they really leverage their like social current layer to bring more masses on chain. I think they also teased some gaming stuff happening on there. They have like partnership with like ZK Sync on having like Pudgy games there, whatever. So yeah, I'm interested in like how the NFT ecosystem goes from there, and they seem to be the team that is actually iterating on new ideas the most, rather than sticking to like trying to make money from like royalties and stuff. So I'm actually excited to see what they build next.
Yep. I can't say the same about Yuga, but
exactly.
It's like we'll see what they build. Not to totally disqualify them. They have a giant treasury, and we'll have to see what they can come up with all that money.
Sorry. So this was a little sidestep from the rest of the episode, but can we reel back to you, Andrew, actually, and talk about your current endeavors aside from Dune, which are more about like teaching and trying to pass along the torch to other wizards. There's both crypto bytes. There's also, you have entire tutorials to dive into Solana, Bitcoin, and all these kind of things. Where can we find all this? Like, if I were a new analyst stepping into the space, what would I do? What would you recommend I look into?
Yeah, I suggest people go to read.cryptodatabytes.com, which has literally everything I've worked on in there. There's guides for Solana, Ethereum, Bitcoin. Most concepts that you're wondering about are probably covered in one of those guides somewhere. So definitely take a look. They start from beginner level and some of them get into really hard stuff. And I always think that it's easier to learn more with the community. In this ecosystem, if you try to just build analysis by yourself in a silo, you're going to have a bad time. So I created the Byte Explorers as a way for people to kind of learn and earn together. Basically, anyone can mint and join us. You can use any data platform you want. And we go on different quests, such as like you can share what you're working on and get feedback and tokens for sharing your work. You can answer people's data questions on Farcaster, and also earn tokens, both NFTs and like USDC payouts for answering those questions. A lot of people ask me like, hey, how do I find a bounty? I'm like, if you answer people's questions, guaranteed you will find a bounty. But if you just go out there and try to find bounties or jobs, you're not going to have a good time. So there's that. And then we're also running missions, which are kind of longer research missions with larger rewards. So we're running one right now with Open Rank. So anyone who likes graph algorithms and graph data sets, we're running a month-long competition to build the best graph data sets using Dune and Open Rank. But you can find all of that basically on my Twitter, and also just go to read.cryptodatabytes.com. Literally everything is there.
Links will be in the description as well.
Great.
But yeah, thank you for doing all this. I think it's kind of lacking this education angle, and we're all like, if we look at how we learned to do crypto data, there's not really a standardized process that's like we can recommend. And like, I'm constantly asked like, how the fuck do I get to analyze, like, to understand the blockchain and stuff? I don't necessarily know what to point to, and now I point to your stuff, which is by far the best that I know of. So yeah, thank you for this.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, my pleasure.
Yeah, echo on that. I like getting requests or questions from normie data friends being like, how can I start on crypto data? And I just send our network thing that's like forever ago that you've done with a bunch of people.
I need to do a new version of that.
Maybe like before we close out, I have another question for Andrew, which is, I guess, like a quick, just basic rundown of like, what are the resources for people who want to look into Solana data? Like, what are the data ecosystem or like the data tooling for Solana so far? We know Dune has Solana data. Is there any other platform has Solana data? And like, do you just use basically SoScan, or pretty much has to be something like you have to dig into each project's docs and like code and stuff? And that's question one. Or basically generate your tips for people to dive into Solana data. Second is, what's your outlook or basically your suggestions for people to solve this problem of like Solana is data so hard to query? Like, what do you see as the challenges needs to be addressed, to say either by Solana Foundation or all the apps developer building on Solana, or maybe just missing a data tooling or platform dedicated for Solana? Like, what can be done to improve this current situation? So 2 questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great set of questions. That is exactly the presentation that I'm going to be giving at Solana Breakpoint in September, is just showing them, here's everything I can do on Ethereum tooling. Here's what I have to do with Solana. And just kind of showing them, like, I have probably a dozen helper queries to help me find like when was an account created, who owned this account at a given time, give me this function call that included this account. Because you have account lists, I can look for like, show me a Jupiter swap that included this pumped off on token. I've built a bunch of queries with this tooling on its own. I might have to just go build a repo or some CLI for this. I'm hoping that the explorers like Solana FM and SoulScan build better tooling for exploring this data. Like Solana FM is, I think, pushing a lot of the barriers here in terms of like you can actually filter by instruction, which is already like a big step up from last year where you couldn't even filter out failed transactions. You go to any program and it's like, it's all failed transactions. I guess I can't use this. But it's extremely limited, to be honest. It's just me with my 10 or 20 utility Dune queries and then hoping and praying that one of the explorers can help. And a lot of my time is spent DMing the devs, which is like, the devs are actually very responsive and happy to explain the code to you. They just won't document it. So like all of my blogs that you've seen me put out, probably 60% of that is like Telegram messages and explainers from devs at Orca, Solana Foundation, Jito, whatnot. They just don't put it to doc. You kind of have to go and ask these people and build the relationships, which has its pros and cons. But yeah, we could use a lot better tooling, for sure. Like we've been spoiled on Ethereum, but yeah.
I hope that improves going forward and we see better tooling so we can have a better insight, like look into Solana. Yeah. Thanks for, I think, and also a really good starting point is looking at your queries and your dashboards and forking, so you can dive into specific stuff from there.
Agreed.
All right. If there's no last words from anyone, you've listened to Index Podcast. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on and for everything you do for the space. I think, like especially the Solana ecosystem would still be a dark forest. Very happy to have had you on. I'm sure in the history of this podcast, we'll have you on again once you speedrun whatever ecosystem gets popular next. Might be Aptos, might be Monad, or like near, like nobody knows. But it's all gonna be fun. I'm sure you're already looking forward to that.
Looking around.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for listening and catch you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Crypto day wasters, come join us for the parade. From Bitcoin ETF to Solana meme coin trade. Uncovering public secrets in the blockchain shade. Bad chiller, cherry picking liar. We call them out and set your crown on fire.